Good morning. We start a new series called What on Earth Am I Here For? And this first talk is called It's Not About You. Now, if someone was to ask you what's the most important issue we're facing today, what would it be? Could it be health, the fact that it's so difficult getting a GP appointment? Could it be immigration, the concern of all these boats coming into our country with illegal immigrants? Could it be crime? Could it be the economy, where, of course, inflation has hit all of us and affected the price of things like food? Well, I think one of the candidates for the most important issue is actually suicide. Did you know that the biggest killer of men under the age of 50 is suicide? In fact, every 3 out of 4 suicides is committed by a man. What's interesting is that one of the reasons why men commit suicide, or anybody commits suicide, is because life has no meaning. And the antidote to this actually is for people to have meaning, purpose, and value. So my hope is, in talking about this issue of purpose, is not only will we be able to find some purpose for our own lives, but also help others to find purpose for our lives too. Now, one of the challenges, again, of discovering purpose is that we so often think it's all about us. I think of a story I heard some years ago of a guy who was in Ireland trying to get to Dublin, and he came across an Irishman and asked him for directions. And I remember the story goes like something like this: you can't get there from here. I think what's true for this visitor who's trying to find his way to Dublin is true for each one of us, is we can't get from the place we generally start, which is ourself. And when it comes down to it, is that so often we ask ourselves questions which suggest that we have the answers. We ask about what our goals are, what our ambitions are, what our dreams are, what our future's going to be like. And our focus is essentially upon ourselves. But that message which was given to that visitor to Ireland is the same message which I'm giving to you, is you can't get there from here. You have to take a different direction. So why is purpose so important? Well, purpose refers to the central motivating aim of your life. It guides your life decisions, influences your behavior, shapes your goals, offers a sense of direction, and creates meaning. And having a clear life purpose helps you prioritize what really matters. This is why Mark Twain, the author, said this: the 2 most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. So, how do we discover what our purpose is? Well, there's 2 means by which we can do this. One way is through speculation. And what speculation is the activity of simply guessing the best possible answer to the question, even when you don't have enough information to be certain. That's one option. It's about the best guess. Dr. Hugh Moorhead, who was a philosophy professor at Northeastern Illinois University, wrote to 250 philosophers and asked them for the answer to what is the meaning of life. Many of them wrote back to him and gave them their perspective on things. But so what was interesting was the number who wrote back to him and asked him whether he discovered the meaning of life, and could they tell him. The other option beyond speculation is revelation. And what revelation is God's supernatural disclosure to human beings of truth they couldn't otherwise know and are incapable of discovering on their own. And when we look at it from a Christian perspective, what we are specifically talking about is what God has revealed to us, in particular in the Bible. And if you think of it, in life in general, if you want to find out about something, you have to go back to the creator of it. So I look at such things as my car. And if I'm having problems with my car, I go back to the handbook, manufacturer's handbook. And it's the same thing with each one of us, is we have to go back to our Creator, who is God. Let's look at a few scriptures here in a minute. I want to look at the scriptures from Colossians chapter 1. Now, some of you know a bit about the book of Colossians. It's a letter in the New Testament that Paul wrote from the jail that he'd been imprisoned in for simply saying that Jesus was king. Now, the letter to the Colossians were a group of a church that is in what we call modern day Turkey now. And it was developed by a guy who was a convert to Paul's ministry, a chap called Epaphras. Epaphras has shared Jesus with his neighbours, and as a result of that, many have become Christians. And the church had grown, and it was a great beacon of hope in the area. So why would Epaphras invite Paul to write to his fellow believers in Colossae? Well, the main reason was that within Colossians there were new teachings which were coming in, because Colossae was effectively a sort of, you could call it, had a supermarket of religions. And after a while, Jesus wasn't seen as the true king of the universe. He was just simply seen as one of the options amongst many. And so what Paul does is he writes back to the Colossians, and you could summarize the book with one word, which is hope. The first chapter is about hope produced by Christ. The second chapter is about objections to false teachers. The third chapter is about principles for Christian lifestyle. And the fourth chapter is expectations as far as prayer is concerned, and also some greetings he gives to individuals. So this letter was written as an encouragement for them to put Jesus first place in their lives, and not to see him as just simply one of the ways to God. I'm going to read the verses now. This is Colossians 1. I'm just going to read from verses 15 to 20. It says this: "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy." I'll say that again. "So that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed through the cross." So just to unpack that passage, for a second, is that what Paul is simply saying is this: is that God is the bridge between. So Jesus is the bridge between God and humankind. And he's saying that being the image of God, what he does do is he makes visible the invisible God. So if someone asks, what does God look like? Paul would say, like Jesus. That's what God looks like. And secondly, in terms of saying that he's the firstborn over all creation, he's not simply saying he's the firstborn like a created being. What he's saying is that firstborn in terms of rank and superiority. So within the Jewish context, it was the first son who was given the honor, the respect, and the inheritance. And in terms of creation, he's not just simply saying that he's a creature, but that actually he's involved in creation itself. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were all involved in the process. And in terms of talking about him being the head of the church, it's simply seeing him as the source of the river. So it's a real I think, a challenge to Colossian believers not to see Jesus as any more than giving him first place and or to question his authority. And in terms of fullness there, he reconciles all things and puts things back in the right order. So reconciliation is often a term that's used in the county sense, where you're trying to reconcile things which are out of order and put them back in the right place. It's interesting that it says in Colossians 1:14 that speaking of Jesus, that the Word became flesh and made its dwelling amongst us, and we've seen its glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, the word for word there in logos is the word where we get the words logic from, or reason. And in a Greek sense, it was used as the organizing force that created the universe and holds it together. So it wasn't just Paul who was seeing Jesus in this way. Also, John saw him, and the other apostles saw him in the same way too. And also, furthermore, it says in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, that the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. So Jesus provides a true and trustworthy picture of the Father. So God is not just the starting point of your life. He actually is the source of it. Now, one of the illustrations that often is used to try to explain the idea that all religions lead to God is that of what's known as the story of the blind man and the elephant. And behind it, you see a picture of these blind men holding up, touching different parts of the elephant and coming to different conclusions about the elephant. So saying for such things that the trunk was like a snake, the back is like a rock, and so on. And so this represents people who are trying to grasp God, just have different ways of getting to God. The problem with that picture is it's done from the perspective that we are observers of people trying to get to God, and there's no such thing as a revealed God, effectively. So the point I want to make basically is this: is that God is not just the source of our life. It's actually through him we discover the meaning of life. So on the day of Pentecost, when Peter stood up and talked of Jesus, he spoke of Jesus as being both Lord and Christ. And what made him both Lord and Christ was because he defeated death in both his death and his resurrection. And so he has the key to both life and death. So the question here really is, how should we live then in relation to Christ? Well, there's a wonderful scripture in Galatians 2:20 which says this: I'm crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but the life I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Someone's put it this way: within each one of our hearts there is both a cross and a throne. Now, if we are still on the throne of our lives, Jesus is still on the cross. So we need to decide who is going to be on the throne of our lives. If it's going to be Jesus, then we've got to put ourselves upon the cross. So what does that mean in practice? Well, just to turn to another letter by Paul, Romans chapter 12, Paul says this. Just get into it now, 1 second. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So, sacrifices, of course, were dead. when something was put on the altar, they were kind of killed. But what Paul is saying here is that you've got to offer yourself to God as a living sacrifice. So how can we offer ourselves to God as living sacrifices? Well, someone has said that we need to live as dead people. What's a dead person like? He's facing one direction, has no plans of his own, and his life is in the hands of another. And that's what we've got to do if we want to discover what God's purpose is for each one of us. I remember hearing a story of a lady who was in this revival meeting in Africa, and she said that she had no money, and the offering basket was going around. At that point, the offering basket was very big because you'd have thousands of people at this kind of meeting. But she had no money to put in, so what she did is she put herself into the offering basket. Now, why would she do that? Well, just as the Russian novelist Andrew Bitov said, is this because she knew without God, life makes no sense. So just to kind of bring it all together, point to ponder, it's not about me. Verse to remember, Colossians 1:16, all things have been created through him and for him. And the question to consider is, how can we remind ourselves that life is not about living for ourselves, but living for God? And that's where we find our true purpose. Thank you for listening.